Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X research and professional physicist, and today I'd like to talk to you about another one of my articles. This one is entitled Nemesis and Planet X. Now Nemesis is the name given to a star that is supposed to be the Sun's binary twin, and Planet X is the name of one of the planets that orbits the star. Nemesis is often referred to as a dead star or a brown dwarf star. And a brown dwarf star is a star that has aged to the point that it goes through a red giant and white dwarf phases, after which it cools to become a faint star emitting only infrared light. But just before losing all the ability to emit visible light, it would be able to emit dark red light. Now another name for Planet X is the planet of the crossing, or Nibiru. And to the Sumerians, the crossing referred to a time that occurs between two eras. And during this time, huge political changes occur on Earth, as well as physical changes such as rains, floods, and earthquakes. And the Bible refers to a time when great upheaval will come on Earth, just before the time when Jesus comes to rule the planet. And in Isaiah 13 verse 13 it says, "Therefore I shall shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place, in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger." Now this time of God's wrath is usually referred to as the day of the Lord. And it is likely that this time of transition from this current era in which Satan has been ruling to the time when Jesus will be ruler of the earth is nearly upon us, and that therefore Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, is approaching perihelion. In other words, its closest position to the Sun. Now the Sumerians believed that Planet X would be visible, especially at certain times. And we see here a diagram for the orbit of Planet X. And what we see here, its closest approach, according to the Sumerians, was the asteroid belt. This is the asteroid belt. But it would be viewed at three different points, A, B, and C. Point A is a point where it is in alignment with Mercury. Point B is when it crosses Jupiter's orbit, and point C where it approaches its perihelion position in the asteroid belt. They also believed that it was dark red, visible during daylight, had a period of 3,600 years, and that its orbit was elliptical and took it far beyond Pluto. They used a cross or a winged disk as a symbol for this planet. They believed that it orbited the Sun in retrograde fashion, and as I mentioned before, it could be seen at these three different points. They also believed that it collided with a planet that was where the asteroid belt now is, and that the largest part of that planet eventually became our planet Earth. And also that at the time Nibiru was orbiting a star, a dark star, which is usually called Nemesis, but that since then it was captured by the Sun, and it's been orbiting the Sun ever since. Now there is another theory which states that Nibiru is still orbiting Nemesis, and Nemesis is the star that has the 3,600 year orbit and comes to its perihelion position. It is the Sun's binary twin, and that its outermost planet is the planet Nibiru, which comes close to the inner solar system at the asteroid belt. And that this star orbits like all the planets in the solar system, prograde motion, but that because it stays outside the solar system, its outermost planet seems to move through the solar system in this retrograde fashion. Now, the suggested evidence for Nibiru is actually the theory of continental drift, which states that the planets were once, the continents were once one whole planet, which since then have separated into several continents. There are, however, competing theories. Some of them suggest that the continents separated very quickly and not over millions of years, but that this happened during the flood, and that at that time also large amounts of rock were ejected into space, and that this rock ended up making up the asteroid belt objects, whilst the space left behind became the Pacific Ocean. So this is an illustration of the continental drift. All the planets were once one whole, once all the continents were together in one continent, and have since separated and continue to separate slowly. Now, it's important to remember that the Sumerians reported that planet X was dark red and visible during the daylight. And this suggests that it's not actually a planet, but a faint star. So it is probably a brown dwarf star, or close to being a brown dwarf star, since it is still able to emit dark red light. And the cross symbol would then possibly be due to the cross pattern of its planets, as we can see here. This is an image taken of a faint red star with several planets around it in the shape of a cross. So this object would then have the shape of a cross associated to it in two ways: the planet of the crossing and the fact that its planets position form a cross in the sky. And it's good to remember that in Matthew 24 verse 30, Jesus said, "And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory." So again, the appearance of this mini planetary system in the sky just before the coming of Jesus to rule the earth is possibly the sign that we would see to mean that it was close. Now, another possibility is that possibly explains that this object is not a planet, is the fact that if it did collide with a planet that was at the point of the position of the asteroid belt, that first of all, it's not likely that planets collide, because planets are negatively charged and so they would repel each other. But if this object is actually a star, it approaching a planet could cause that planet to break up into pieces. So that may explain what happened with the planet that became the asteroid belt. Then another explanation, and it has historical records also talk, and even the Sumerians used the symbol of a disk with wings, suggesting that this object has wings. And how would an object have wings? Well, if it is a brown dwarf star, an aging star that has gone through the red dwarf and the white dwarf phases, then it would have a large amount of material in the gaseous phase surrounding it. And this material was what used to be the layers, the outer layers of the star. And then this gas would be ionized and would possibly form into two tails due to an interaction between this object and the sun. And so there would be an electrical interaction between this object, which would be a star, and the sun as this object approaches the sun. So thus, if the Sumerian historical observations are correct, Nibiru has a perihelion position with respect to the Sun, as which is the same as the distance between the Sun and the asteroid belt, which is between 2.2 and 3.5 AU. Now, the existence of Planet X is validated by the work of Dr. R.S. Harrington, who wrote about the location of Planet X in 1988. And Dr. Harrington used observations for the planets Uranus and Neptune, which were known to have perturbed orbits, to come up with a location for searching for Planet X. And he suggested searching below a declination of minus 38 degrees, which is far south of the ecliptic. He therefore then took his 8-inch telescope to New Zealand in 1991, and but unfortunately died in January of 1993 in New Zealand, and under very suspicious circumstances, and most probably because he did find what he was looking for. So Dr. Harrington, in his 1988 article, mentioned that the object was very likely to be in the Scorpius constellation and slightly less likely to be in the opposite side of the sky or in the Taurus constellation. And in that article, Dr. Harrington also thanked Tom van Flandern, who, according to him, first convinced Dr. Harrington that Planet X might be real and worth looking for. Now, it is strange that Dr. Harrington needed convincing to realize that Planet X was real. And this was because he should have known that there were several articles published before this time about an object being discovered. And that object seemed to have been a brown dwarf star, which could have explained the perturbations in Neptune and Uranus. Or was it that he simply did not know? Now, the Pioneer spacecraft, and that is Pioneer 10 and 11, were designed to find either Planet X or the brown dwarf star, or possibly both. And these spacecraft were launched in 1972 and 1973. And we do know about that because the 1987 New Science and Invention Encyclopedia, Volume 18, we find this diagram, and we are told that the two probes were supposed to triangulate the position of a planet at 50 AU and a brown dwarf star, which was also called a dead star, at 538 AU. And we can clearly see in this diagram the two objects, the 10th planet, or Planet X, at 4.7 billion miles, which is about 50 AU, and a dead star, a brown dwarf star, at 50 billion miles. And notice that the term dead star is used. At the time, brown dwarf stars were referred to as stars that were dead, that had aged and had gone through the brown dwarf and the white dwarf phases and had become unable to emit visible light. It was not a substellar object, it was a dead star. Now, it seems that Nibiru and Nemesis, therefore, are possibly two stars, or possibly both stars, and two separate objects, both coming toward the inner solar system at this time, and possibly from very different portions of space. However, we do know that Planet X is coming in from below the ecliptic and has an elliptical orbit similar to a comet. So what we see here would be Planet X or Nibiru, which is also a brown dwarf star, but coming from below the ecliptic up towards the ecliptic, and will leave and go southwards again. Now, the search for Planet X started long before Dr. Harrington's work and is described in a New York Times article from June 19th, 1982. And this article mentions that something must be beyond the known solar system, and it's tugging at Uranus and Neptune, and it's causing irregularities in the orbits. And this suggests a large object, perhaps the long-sought Planet X. And it states that the last time a serious search of the skies was made, it led to the discovery in 1930 of Pluto, the 9th planet. And that the story, though, begins earlier than that, with discovery of Uranus in 1781 by the astronomer and musician William Herschel. And that until then, our solar system seemed to end with Saturn. And that today, the theory of plate tectonics or continental drift, as I mentioned, suggests that the Earth was once made or had continents that were just on one side of the Earth, and that there was a tremendous gap on the other side, and that this matches the story told by the Sumerians of how Earth came about, and that it was basically half a planet which was at the asteroid belt position. This planet was called Tiamat. Then another publication, also in 1982, didn't just mention Planet X, it actually mentioned a planet and a brown dwarf star. And as we see in the image from the encyclopedia, there was a planet and a brown dwarf star mentioned. And in this article, Dr. Alan Hynek wrote, and this was a Science Digest article, about the perturbations in the orbits of Neptune and Uranus, and that these could be explained by either a planetary object at 4 to 7 billion miles from the Sun, or equivalent to 43 to 75 AU, or a brown dwarf star at 50 billion miles, which is equivalent to 538 AU. And he reported that data coming from the Pioneer 10 and 11, launched in 1972 and 1973, would allow the determination of what is out there, whether a planet or brown dwarf star, and that the IRIS satellite would provide further search capabilities. And this satellite had an infrared telescope on board. Then in January of 1983, just a few months later, Dr. Anderson, who worked for JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, was quoted in a New York Times article that he felt that the IRIS infrared telescope would supply an estimate of the object's mass. Now, the fact that an infrared telescope was used indicated that the object they were looking for only emitted infrared light. However, this object and the fact that it was a brown dwarf star was reported in December of 1983 in the Washington Post. And in this article, we are told a heavenly body, possibly as large as the giant planet Jupiter and possibly so close to Earth that it would be part of the solar system, has been found in the direction of the constellation Orion. So this is quite a different position to what Dr. Harrington talked about, which is Scorpius or Taurus. And by an orbiting telescope aboard the U.S. Infrared Astronomical Satellite, or IRIS. And the mystery body was seen twice by the infrared satellite as it scanned the northern sky from last January to November. So this object also seems to be in the northern sky, whilst Dr. Harrington's Planet X was definitely south of the ecliptic, or in the southern sky. And it says when the satellite ran out of the supercold helium that allowed its telescope to see the coldest bodies in the heavens. And the second observation took place 6 months after the first and suggested the mystery body had not moved from its spot in the sky near the western edge of the constellation Orion. And then further down in this article we are told the most fascinating explanation of this mystery body, which is so cold it casts no light, in other words no visible light, and has never been seen by optical telescopes on Earth or in space, and that is a giant gaseous planet as large as Jupiter and as close to Earth as 50 trillion miles. However, the 50 trillion miles was actually a mistake. It was corrected the next day and stated to be 50 billion miles, or equivalent to 538 AU. The object was sometime later classified as a red dwarf and given the name M6V11825. Then shortly after that, it mysteriously was deleted from the official astronomical record without explanation. However, the fact that the object was classified as a star, and we are told it is so cold that it casts no light, tells us that it is a brown dwarf star and that only emits infrared light, and therefore could only be seen by an infrared telescope like the Arbers satellite. So it seems that we have two objects. We have a brown dwarf star and planet X, which is nearly a brown dwarf star. It still seems to be able to emit some dark red light. Now, the existence of the star Nemesis was also validated in a study by Richard A. Miller, which was published in 2002. And this study looked at the lunar impact record for the past 3.5 billion years. He found evidence that Nemesis' orbit changed from orbiting outside the Oort cloud to it becoming an elliptical orbit that brought it through the Oort cloud, thus producing comet showers. He also found that Nemesis' orbit would be unstable and would decrease unless the plane of the orbit was in the plane of the galaxy. So, in addition, he suggested that the star's orbit may have been perturbed by a passing star, thus sending it into a new and much closer orbit to the Sun. Now, since Nemesis' orbit seems to have changed perhaps 400 million years ago, as Dr. Miller suggested, it's possible that, and he also suggested that its orbit was changed by a passing star. And it's possible that that is the time when planet X still orbit Nemesis and thus formed a binary solid star system with it, and that Nemesis was a binary star to the Sun. But that since then, or at that time, 400 million years ago, the system was perturbed by a passing star, and since then all three stars have become basically a trinary system. And it seems that it's possible that both objects are now coming towards perihelion. Now, in figure 8 below, we see an object close to the Sun. It looks like a bright object followed by some debris. And we do know that if a star comes through the Oort cloud, it will bring a large amount of debris with it. This object is possibly it's quite close to the Sun, and this image is from July 3rd, 2016. At the time, Venus was behind the Sun and to the left, but it wouldn't have been as close to the Sun as this object is. So I don't think this can be Venus, and it may be therefore Nemesis, or it could even be Planet X. Both objects will probably bring quite a lot of debris with them, or it could be one of the many brown dwarf stars that have come in and congregated very close to the Sun in the Sun's corona. I have written extensively about that. We seem to have a lot happening in the solar system at this time. So, in conclusion, in addition to large numbers of brown dwarf stars congregated in the Sun's corona, the Sun seems to actually be part of a trinary system where Planet X on Nibiru is one of the stars and Nemesis is another. Both seem to be coming toward their closest position in relation to the Sun at this time. This is Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X physicist. Thank you for watching.